Good evening. Welcome to this special news event. It's presented by weha.com. I'm John Lyons. The coronavirus, COVID-19, has taken hold of the nation's conscience like nothing else since World War II. This is a frightening time with lots of unknowns and a very murky picture of what the future holds for all of us. It was easier to ignore it when it was afflicting another country. Then it arrived on U.S. shores, and still we went about business somewhat normally. We've continued to move on with our lives and careers. Now it has spread throughout the USA and to communities close to ours. Last night, Tom Hanks revealed that he and his wife had been diagnosed, and the NBA suspended the season due to now 2 players testing positive. Hockey and soccer have also suspended, and just an hour ago, baseball announced that they are suspending. What happens next? Our community will see infections and needs to prepare. We can no longer go about our regular business. We must listen to our mayor, our local leaders, the medical professionals, and follow their instructions to the letter. We have a distinguished panel here tonight and are being broadcast live on weha.com, West Hartford Neighbors and Friends, as well as WHCI TV. There are also viewers in other communities who are watching on live feed being simulcast around the region. We welcome all of you. For those of you watching on Facebook, we encourage you to ask questions and we will direct them to our subject matter experts who I'll introduce in a moment. Tonight's program will address the disease itself, the pathology behind it, how it is spread, and other facts pertaining to COVID-19. We will also address some falsehoods about the disease. We will have a discussion from regional and state experts regarding our preparedness and what West Hartford is doing if and when the virus reaches our community. We will talk about preventative measures and what you can do to keep your family safe and healthy. We will have a question and answer session with questions coming from the viewing audience and our panelists providing the answers. Moderating with me this evening is Ronnie Zimber-Newton. Ronnie is the managing editor of weha.com and editor of West Hartford Life. She has 20 years of experience as an award-winning journalist and photojournalist. To her left is Dr. Nicholas Bennett. He is a pediatric infectious disease specialist. He's received his medical training at Cambridge in the United Kingdom and has his Ph.D. in virology, also from Cambridge. His residency and infectious disease fellowship were at SUNY Upstate in Syracuse, New York. He has lived in Connecticut for the last 8 years and was the division head of infectious diseases and immunology, sorry about that, folks, at Connecticut Children's Medical Center until last summer, when he took a break from clinical practice. He is currently engaged in consulting and speaking work. From the West Hartford Bloomfield Health District is a public health nurse, Carol Steinke. She has been a public health nurse for West Hartford Bloomfield Health District for a year. Prior to that, she was the public health nursing supervisor for the city of Hartford for 13 years as program manager of the Disease Prevention Health Promotion Division. From the public safety side is Bob McHugh. Bob is the former assistant chief of police in the town of West Hartford, having served for over 7 years and currently serves in the Office of Emergency Management. He served on the police force, as did his father and grandfather, starting in 1929. Finally, Patty Albee. Patty is the founder and administrator of the Neighbors and Friends page on Facebook. She is a lifelong West Hartford resident, attended schools here in town, as did her kids. She has a unique perspective and understands the pulse of West Hartford. She will be following the Facebook feed for questions to pass along to our panelists. There are several big breaking stories locally, so we're going to start this off with Ronnie, and she's going to give us the latest headlines. Ronnie?
So thank you very much, and I'm just going to take this microphone. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I wish I could be doing this about something really happy and exciting going on in our community, and maybe the time will come that we'll have an opportunity to do that. But thank you to John for putting together this event. He was really the one who organized it, and we're very happy to be able to host it on weha.com, and very thankful to Jen Evans and the staff at WHCI for giving us the opportunity to use the studio and to also record this so that people, if you're not watching it live, can at least benefit from the information that we're sharing here today. So, headlines of the day, and honestly, since this morning, the headlines have been coming fast and furious. It's hard to even keep up with them. By the time I write a story, I need to go back and edit it. West Hartford Public Schools announced today, Superintendent Tom Moore sent a letter to everyone in the community that the schools are going to be closed for 2 weeks beginning on, beginning on Monday, March 16th for a period of 2 weeks. So during that time, it's really functioning as a break or as snow days, really. There won't be any classes going on. There won't be any learning, although, of course, we hope our students will be doing something other than playing video games for that period of time. After that period of time, hopefully schools will be able to reopen, but if not, there's going to be some type of distance learning program being looked at, and much more information will be forthcoming. There's also a lot of things that concern people when you're talking about schools being closed. There's childcare. There are about 27% of our public school community is on the free and reduced lunch program through the federal government, actually. And there are going to be accommodations made. There's going to be a lot more information to come. This is brand new news today, so there definitely are questions that are going to be answered. I just got some additional breaking news today. This is relative to West Hartford. This came in about as we were arriving here today. So in addition to the schools, Veterans Rink will be closed from Saturday through this Saturday, March 14th, through Sunday, March 29th. The plans are now to reopen the rink on the 30th. Cornerstone is closed for the same period of time, so Cornerstone Aquatic Center. The West Hartford Senior Center is also going to be closed from Monday, March 16th through Sunday, March 29th, and hopefully reopen on March 30th. The Elmwood Community Center also has those same closings, March 16th through the 29th. The CRT lunch program, which currently takes place at the Elmwood Community Center, will be shifted to a box lunch that people can come pick up on a daily basis, but lunch will not be served at the facility. The Elmwood Community Center itself, the Elmwood Senior Center is at the Elmwood Community Center. The community center is also closed to the public for March 16th through the 29th, other than critical services, and that includes the YWCA Daycare Center, which at this point, at least according to this piece of paper I have here, is going to remain open. Other facilities that are not being closed are the outdoor parks in West Hartford, Westmore Park, other than that there won't be any programs from March 14th through the 29th. Rockledge Golf Course will remain open. Buena Vista Golf Course will remain open. Dial-A-Ride will still be available for medical appointments, for grocery shopping, and for CRT lunch pickups. And the food pantry self-select Wednesday program has been suspended, but people who need and rely on the food pantry, and we have a lot of people in West Hartford who do, can come to Town Hall and pick up bags of food. So I'm now going to turn the microphone over, and if any other breaking news comes in while we're talking, I'll grab the microphone back. But I'm going to turn things over to Nick Bennett, and Nick Bennett is our resident physician here. He's a specialist in infectious diseases. I couldn't come up with it. And here's Nick. Nick's going to talk to you and respond to a lot of the questions that people have asked in advance.
Thanks, Ronnie. Thanks very much. So I'm glad to get the opportunity to be on air a little bit, and I've had so many questions from friends and family about the coronavirus. So I actually had a slide set prepared, but I don't know if anyone can see it, so I have it as my notes in front of me to give you a little bit of background and also some reasons why we need to take this seriously. I think the population is falling into two camps. One camp has been, this is fine, we don't have to worry about it, and the other camp is doom and gloom, and I need 3 months of toilet paper in my house, and really the reality is somewhere in the middle. Toilet paper won't help you with this. So it's a coronavirus. Corona is not named after the beer, it's named because under the microscope it has a crown. It looks like it has stubs on it. That's how it got its name. And it's not a new type of virus, but it's a new strain of a coronavirus. Other viruses like SARS and MERS you may have heard of, they're serious. They caused outbreaks but weren't pandemics, didn't go around the world. But there's other coronaviruses that can cause common colds and can be more serious. There's 4 serious coronaviruses that we can get as humans. Let's see what else I've got. So what is it like? So the symptoms are similar in many cases, in most cases, to a flu-like illness without as much of the body aches and things like that. Fever is common in about 80% of cases. In kids, it seems to be less common. There's a dry cough, and in serious cases, there's shortness of breath. That's not very good. The shortness of breath tends to become worse. There are some slides. In the last couple of weeks of illness. The kids often have no symptoms at all, but can appear to spread the infection. And this is a big deal in terms of how we're thinking about containing the disease. Importantly, although the kids often have no symptoms and can spread it, the risk of a severe disease increases dramatically with age. And I think I've got a graph of that coming up next. We don't know why that is. One theory was that the kids are mounting a less inflammatory response because their immune system is less developed, but at least in the evidence from China and their response to it, the use of steroids as an immune suppressant seems to make things worse. And the CDC is advising we don't use steroids. So we don't know why kids tend to do better. We can have the next slide. So why is it different? Well, it's different because it's new, which means that there's no herd immunity. As humans, we've not really seen this virus before, so it's going to spread very quickly. And what also is new about it is there's a relatively high mortality compared to other more typical coronaviruses. Mortality is how many people die compared to how many people get it. But the average is very misleading, and we've seen numbers that are, quote, similar to the flu, and it's not really, it is higher than influenza. But the mortality in young people is very low, and the mortality as you get over 60 raises to 3.6%, and then it's around 15% if you're over 80. That's very high. It's a high risk of death if you catch this and you're over 80. There's also increased risk if you have heart disease, diabetes, cancer, things like that, which you might expect. The other big problem is there is significant morbidity. And what is morbidity? That is how sick you are versus how many die. So if you end up in the hospital with this, the people are there for 2 to 3 weeks. That is a long time to be in the hospital with a respiratory infection. They're tying up high levels of care, either in hospital beds or intensive care level beds. Go to the next slide, please. This is a graph of the mortality by age, and you can see that your kids less than 10 aren't even on the graph. There hasn't really been a case of anyone yet less than 10 dying. And then as you get older, although it's low, it's not zero, but then it increases dramatically with age. So really what we're worried about here as a society, as a population, is protecting the older age groups, because they seem to be hit extremely hard. And it's causing problems. And this is with decent medical care. This is not third world countries. This is decent medical care. And in fact, ironically, the numbers out of Africa are remarkably good. It's not spreading much in Africa for whatever reason. Go to the next slide, please. So how worried am I? Someone asked me this question today. How worried are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And I said, well, if I get viral diarrhea or Lyme disease, me personally, that's about a 1. What's my personal worry of catching one of those two things? About a 1. You know, it's going to be relatively mild or treatable. If I get the flu, I'm going to call that about a 3. Like, flu is bad. As a society, flu kills tens of thousands of people every year. It kills hundreds of children. We need a vaccine. There's follow-on complications with pneumonia. How do I rate COVID-19? Currently, I'm putting it at 5. And the reason for that is because of not where it is now, but where I'm worried it's going to be. And number 10 is if we have the Italian experience. So we can have the next slide, please. So if the epidemic peaks quickly and early, hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. So you can't treat 25 patients if you've only got 20 beds. That's the bottom line. If people come in quickly, if this spreads quickly, if there's a relatively high morbidity and mortality amongst the older people, you're not going to have enough resources to treat them. And the Italian experience, which is coming out through doctors who are posting their experiences online. It's a first world, first-class healthcare system. They knew the virus was coming. They emptied the hospitals. They converted operating rooms to intensive care units. And just today, I think it was today, they came out with advice because they're so overwhelmed. If you're a certain age, if you have certain comorbidities, if you have other medical conditions, the doctors are having to make a decision. Do we even start treating these patients? Do we just let them die?
Wow, that's some kind of
They've
triage.
completely, it's battlefield triage. They've completely become overwhelmed. We're not there, but if we start to get there, if this spreads and becomes as bad as it has done. Now, one of the problems that the Italians are saying is we didn't take this seriously enough early enough. So as we go through, you'll see some of the things we can do to blunt the curve. And we'll talk about what blunting the curve means. If we can have the next slide. So what can we do about this? So that was a rather dramatic explanation of what's going on in Italy. But the first thing is be sensible. So don't panic. Be sensible. Hoarding, for instance, is not helpful. And isolation is helpful, especially if you have respiratory symptoms. Stopping this spread or slowing the spread is going to be helpful. If we can blunt the curve and shift all the cases further down the timeline. Don't complain about restrictions. So I saw people complaining online about, oh, my kid's basketball game is cancelled, what's he going to do? And I'm like, your season passes are worthless if you're on a ventilator in the ICU. Right, that's the bottom line. Be sensible about this. It doesn't matter. A game in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter. Children may be relatively safe, and I've said to my friends and colleagues, well, the mortality is shunted to the high end of the age group, but ultimately, I've got a mother-in-law. I've got my parents back in the UK, and I had to tell them, don't babysit. You're not looking after the grandkids for now because the risk of them catching it and getting sick is that much higher. And now someone's standing in front of my slides getting photos. The other thing is you don't need to get tested just in case. Go to the hospital or the emergency room if you have an emergency, aspire to the emergency. A lot of people are saying, oh, we don't have enough test kits, and we haven't had enough test kits. How are we going to know what's going on? Well, that's true. We do need to know what's going on, but you don't have to get tested just in case. At the moment, the guidance is very good. We're looking at testing people who are coming into the hospital who are getting admitted. We're looking at testing healthcare workers who are potentially exposed because if they're infected, you have to pull them. Once you start pulling healthcare workers from a system that's already becoming busy and saturated, the system just gets worse. And that, again, is what they've experienced in Italy, where the healthcare workers are getting sick. And they've had to quarantine themselves. This is what I mean by blunting the curve. So if you have uncontrolled transmission, you get a very high peak of cases. And if we can just get the same number of people infected, but over 6 months instead of 6 weeks, you start pushing that curve way down and flattening it. And that dotted line is indicative of the healthcare system capacity. How much can you handle? Well, you do not want to be above that line because that's the excess number of deaths you could have if your system can't cope with it. So it's a case of really being sensible, reducing spread, blunting that curve down. Remember, we don't have a vaccine for this. The last big pandemic we had was in 2009 with the H1N1 influenza pandemic. We had a vaccine for that relatively quickly because we had existing technology, we knew what the antigens were going to be, and several companies could just jump on the bandwagon and a little late, but they could get a vaccine out for the next season, and it was really helpful. Even so, 2009 was one of the worst influenza years that we had, especially in pediatrics. We're hoping that we can blunt this curve as other places have done. China was able to do some of this in terms of pushing the curve down by very restrictive recommendations. So we can have the next slide, please. So a few other things about COVID-19. There's no approved treatment yet. There's several research trials underway with a couple of agents. There's no vaccine. This is likely to significantly impact our lifestyles and society for months. So you've just heard some new restrictions going over the next few weeks. Some schools are closing for a few weeks. Some schools are closing indefinitely. And it's a case of managing it as we go and see what the data shows us. If we can blunt this curve and we can get back to a little more of a normal life, that's fine. But if we hear recommendations that this has to be extended, then I think we have to pay attention. And my last point is listen to reliable sources. There is so much misinformation that's already out there. Listening to scientists, listening to trusted media, Facebook memes, I mean, they're funny. I saw that the curve being pushed down, with cats drawn on it, because apparently cats are much better at spreading memes and information on the net than people are. But it's really pay attention and check with things. And that's where I've been getting so much information, so many questions recently, is because people are checking in with me and saying, is this true, is this true, is this true? And often it's a case of, well, yes, but. And so
What's safe for us to do, though, right now? What can we safely do?
stay home.
Can we go outside?
It's very flippant. So it's generally safe to go outside. What people are looking at is restricting large gatherings. Large numbers of people where there's more likely going to be close contact, particularly risk of coughing, sneezing, shaking hands. As we arrived here today, no one shook hands. It was all elbows and high fives in the midair and things like that, because we're aware of this now. And if we can, again, slow down that spread, that's really what's going to make the difference in the long run here, in the medium haul and the long haul.
So I've got several questions. I'm sure other panelists have questions. Number one, you hear conflicting stories. Can or has the virus mutated, and can a person catch it twice?
So the mutation question is a good one. It's an RNA virus, which from a virologist means, yeah, it could mutate, but it's not necessarily going to be mutating like the flu does. The flu is very, very good at shifting and drifting and changing its genetics. So I'm not expecting that based on what other coronaviruses have done, but there's a potential for that. It's just that I wouldn't expect it. In terms of reinfection, that is a really good question, and I tried looking up cases of that and reports of that.
So little data
it's
so far.
so little data so far, but quite early on. There's been some suspicions of people who've got worse and then better and then worse again, and they're not sure whether it's a reinfection or whether the original infection has relapsed.
Yeah.
So we don't know the answer to that yet. That's going to be a critical one to answer, because if you don't get immunity to this, it makes a vaccine really hard to consider.
Right. Next question, which I think a lot of people have to be thinking about, is can it be spread through currency or through the mail? Meaning somebody's infected,
Touching an
unknowingly
envelope.
they mail a letter, they seal it, it mails, 2 days later it arrives at somebody's house.
Now, there's some data on how the virus can sit on surfaces for a while. Many viruses can. Doesn't necessarily mean they're viable or they're going to be infectious. And viruses like SARS, for instance, can sit on surfaces for a while, but there's absolutely no data or evidence that it spread that way. So I don't think that's something we have to worry about. We're really looking at respiratory spread here. So covering your cough, hand washing should be more than sufficient to deal with person-to-person spread. And I wouldn't worry about the other possibilities. There's no data for that yet.
And obviously, Ronnie, with the breaking news, we've closed down a lot of town services, so this question's a little outdated, but I'm still going to ask it because I don't know what other towns are doing, and we've got a lot of people watching. Swimming in a pool, swimming in a heated pool.
Should be fine. It's an envelope virus. You've got chlorine in the pool. It kills pretty much anything except cryptosporidium.
Okay.
So for that side of it, I'd be more worried about getting infected in the changing rooms from someone coughing on me than I would be in the pool.
Another question that I think a lot of people are wondering is, and it's been immensely frustrating for me, is watching people try to equate this to the flu using facts like the number of dead. Really, why is it so much dangerous, or why is it so misguided to equate this to the flu?
The single biggest reason is where we are in the epidemic. We're very early on. So the flu is something we see regularly, we see every year. It causes huge numbers of infections and high numbers of deaths, and then all these knock-on effects in terms of secondary pneumonias and increased risk of heart attacks after catching the flu, all of these things, which is why we should all get our flu shots. This is different because we don't yet know how it's going to behave. It's likely to infect large numbers of the population eventually, and with a relatively high mortality in certain age groups. So the average mortality is misleading, I think, because it's a different virus. So initially, I think a lot of us, myself included, were looking at the numbers and feeling somewhat reassured that this was going to settle down and maybe infect small numbers of the population. In reality, it seems to be spreading at a point where it's going to cause problems for the healthcare systems if we don't do a better job of containing it.
The numbers don't lie, and that's one of the things that's
Right.
most scary to me is and you that slide you showed toward the end of your presentation, where you just see the complete overwhelming of all medical systems, all medical infrastructure that we have in
Yeah.
place.
And
That's
we don't-
very scary.
Yeah, we don't want to get in that situation. I mean, these are reports from a couple of places in Italy, but they put out as warnings to everyone else, basically.
So I think really, I mean, you've covered a lot. We have two other guests here. I'm going to introduce our next. Well, I already did introduce our next guest, but Carol, tell us a little bit about what you do. What are you running into as questions? What types of things are you seeing out there?
Sure,
Carol's with the West Hartford Bloomfield Health District.
So I'm one of the public health nurses here at West Hartford Bloomfield. Getting a lot of calls from people concerned, again, asking, actually people that have had some risks. They've traveled to either New York or Boston where they possibly had exposure and they actually are truly symptomatic. I had a physician call me today too. What do I do? Where do I get them tested? I'm like, we're really not testing folks unless they're severe. Again, we have limited access to some of the testing at this point. It should be expanding soon. But at this point, it's still for those that are critically, pneumonias or, respiratory distress in the hospital. They're hospitalized. So this, again, we check with the individual, make sure that they're healthy. Do they have any other health problems? Are they diabetics? Anything like that? Heart disease? Are they otherwise healthy? And as long as I review their symptoms with them and make sure that they stay home, isolate themselves, really, separate themselves from the rest of the family. We encourage them to stay in their own bedroom. If you have 2 bathrooms, use the separate bathroom so you're not sharing towels or, and cleaning down surfaces and shared tables, or don't share utensils. Really, separating yourselves from your families to keep your family safe. Making sure that, again, if you do live alone and you do need help, have people drop food for you or supplies for you that you might need so you're not getting out and about in crowded areas to kind of prevent that. Really looking to make sure that if they do have a fever that they're using Motrin and Tylenol and alternating to keep their fevers down, keeping themselves hydrated, just giving them some tips to care for themselves and care for their families.
Now, why alternate between Motrin and Tylenol?
It just helps to bring the fever down and some of the symptoms that you see too, rather than just always hitting the same one. Sometimes after a while, Motrin over and over can be tough on the stomach, and Tylenol can have other issues for you too, so we like to kind of alternate them.
So I have a question now. The very first sign of a symptom, you're feeling a little scratchy in the throat, or maybe you feel a little flushed. Does vitamin C, I've always been a believer that vitamin C helps the common cold. If you get after it early, is that the type of thing, has any chance of helping at all?
There you go, Doc.
I think the general rule of thumb is if you're vitamin deficient, then supplementing it's helpful, but generally there's nothing that's going to boost your immune system. Okay. People may feel they feel better, and that's great, that's fine. The worst thing that can happen, generally speaking, if you get a lot of multivitamins on board, is you get expensive urine, and that's about it. So there's nothing wrong though with drinking a ton of orange juice if you're feeling sick. At the very worst, you're going to get hydrated properly. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Again, other tips like everyone's been doing is talking about the hand washing. Make sure it's not just a quick under the sink wash. Really, the 20 seconds. Use the soap. Wash between your fingers. Really use your finger, your nails on your hands. Really wash your hands well with soap and water. And sing a song for 20 seconds, so you really know that you're washing those hands thoroughly, just to prevent that spread. And trying not to overwhelm our ERs and our hospitals, just because I think people are going to be scared and want to think that they should go to the hospital because they have a fever and they've got a cough. Yeah. Really try to call your own primary care doctor. Let them help work you through your symptoms and what their recommendations are. We've gotten calls ourselves in our office just to kind of help people make decisions as what's the best treatment for them, best option for them. And again, if you get to the point where you are having respiratory problems, make sure that you notify. They're either calling sometimes the local health department, the state health department, or their primary care doctor, so we can let EMS folks know if you do have to go by ambulance, and also let the hospital know that you are arriving so that we can protect our healthcare workers also.
Let's talk about masks for a second. I've heard conflicting information depending on who you listen to about the value of wearing a mask. Is it better for somebody who has been diagnosed? Is it better for the healthcare workers? Is it better for lay people if they're traveling out in public? What's the right time to wear a mask?
Regular people shouldn't just be wearing a mask just because you're afraid. The mask should be used appropriately. So there's N95, which are fit-tested masks specifically for your healthcare workers. So it's not just to be put on anybody else. So it's really your healthcare workers that would have the N95 mask. If you are a person that's coming into a hospital that they think might have corona or are symptomatic, they will put a regular, almost like a surgical mask on you, which is not as heavy duty and thinner, but it's still going to help if you cough or sneeze. It's going to protect the people right in front of you, that kind of a thing. So you don't want to wear a mask just to wear a mask.
Right. Okay.
Oh yes, and here you go.
I can add something to that. The mask issue is become a really hot topic issue for the healthcare workers. So many masks are being bought up in the community that the hospitals themselves are having trouble buying them. So the community lay people wearing masks is not going to protect them. That's the first thing. If you have a cough, if you're sick, you're going to prevent the spread to other people. So that's fair enough. But not everyone's going to need masks. And really, if you're sick and coughing in the community, maybe staying home is better than wearing a mask. But what's actually happening now is healthcare workers are not having enough masks. They're being asked to reuse them. They're being asked to wear them for longer periods. And as a result, they're getting sicker, they're getting infected themselves. And that puts the patients at risk. The reason why healthcare workers wear masks, especially the N95s, is to protect them, because they're going patient to patient to patient. The social isolation is not an option for them. They're in close contact, and in some cases, particularly with the sickest patients, they're dealing with respiratory secretions, they're having to intubate the patients, and so they need full protection. Reusing equipment or using the wrong equipment because the lay public has bought up all the medical supplies is just downright dangerous, and it's incredibly socially irresponsible, frankly. We have a duty to each other, and that includes social isolation. That includes being sensible with what we're doing with things like masks, because it's not all about one, it's about everyone.
Yep.
And again, just adding one more thing, again, about the social distancing, keeping that 6-foot distance. You don't handshake. People, we talked earlier, they're doing the elbow bumps or foot kicks or all those kind of things just to kind of prevent the touching each other. Try not to touch your face and wash your hands frequently. Again, I can pass it on to Bob.
No.
Bob McHughes, Emergency Management for Town of West Hartford.
Yeah, thanks for having us here today. In an event like this, what the town moves into is what we call an incident command system, an ICS. So the first thing that we did a couple days ago was Chief Priest, who's the fire chief, but also the emergency management director, in consultation with the town manager and the mayor, decided to form or go into this ICS mode. And what that does is basically creates a task force of all different members from the town and Board of Education. So we currently have 30 different members on this task force broken into different groups. Some are for purchasing, some's for logistics, some are operations, and some are planning. And basically the town's response gets broken down into 3 different areas. The first is education and communication. So we've got our website up that you can go to through the Town of West Hartford that has a links of resources. We're trying to really push out. The town has a very good Everbridge system. It's West Hartford Citizen Advisory Network that we encourage everybody to sign up for, and that's through the webpage also. And what that does is if there's an event where we have to push information out, this will send information to your cell phone, email address, or regular hard phone. The regular Everbridge system only works on a reverse 911 landline. So if you haven't registered your cell phone, you won't get those messages. So we're just really trying to push and get the word out on that. Then the second part is obviously responding, is we, both police and fire, are gearing up for the possibility of increased medical calls. So we're making sure the officers and the firefighters have the equipment, the right training to handle those situations. And just to echo what everybody's saying is, call your primary care physician first. Don't call 911. That's going to overwhelm the system, as we really want to reserve that for the folks that are really in the need. And then the last thing that we're working on right now is it's a continuation of operations plan, or a COOP plan, because unlike a lot of other businesses, we really aren't going to be able to close. So there's a lot of issues that we're trying to resolve now. Is how do we maintain services when the folks that we work with are sick, have to care for somebody that's sick, or has the same child care issues that everybody has. So we're just really going to stress everybody needs to be patient. Just to everybody else's comments, it's going to be fast moving, situations are going to change, and it's really important to pay attention to the web pages and the links. It's one of the reasons why we're not putting out a lot on paper, because it changes, it seems like, every minute. So we want to really push people to keep updating and looking at all the good links that are out there.
Okay,
Speaking,
great.
can I add
Thank
to
you,
that?
sir. Yep.
Speaking of links and websites too, again, the West Hartford Health District has a link, and it links to both the State Department of Public Health and CDC, so you can always get updates on it. And again, we get daily updates. We have conference calls 3 times a week with CDC and with DPH and White House briefings, just trying to stay up to date with what's happening and how it's changing.
Okay, great. Now, am I hearing, have we lost Rocky? Have we lost the feed on?
No, we're still on.
Okay, we do have it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, the phone just times out.
The
Okay.
sound is an issue,
Okay, all right, yeah.
Try to talk directly into the microphone.
and
Okay,
loudly,
okay,
like
okay.
towards the phone.
Okay, now, I've got a couple of notes from Mayor Cantor. Ronnie, do you want to handle this? This is the talking points. Mayor Cantor, Sherry Cantor wants to get us a few points out to the community.
Sure.
So-
And I'm actually going to put these, I set up today on WeHA.com a hub, which is a place where all of the information that's coming out that's really pertinent and relevant to West Hartford is located. So the announcement from the school, you can find that there. I'll have a story later today about all these other closings in the town. Any kind of correspondence from the town or links to places where you would want to go, like the link to sign up to the Everbridge notification system is there in this one place, as well as links to the CDC website, to the World Health Organization. There's also, I think it's Johns Hopkins has a really cool graphic that updates in real time how the virus is impacting the world. So there's a lot of resources that I've put in this hub, and as things change, I'll be updating it. So some of the other things that are going to be addressed is making sure, well, this is a message from Mayor Cantor. Make sure that you, your family, friends, and neighbors, especially people over 60 years old, are registered on the Everbridge system to receive communications. So, as Bob said, if you were registered a couple of years ago, but like my family, you've gotten rid of your landline, you need to go back in and register because you need that kind of notification to come to your cell phone or email. It can come to you via text. I think I got at least 7 or 8 notifications, but overkill is better than not getting notifications at all. Mayor Cantor said, try your best to prepare for having 2 weeks of supplies in your home. That's food, that's toilet paper, that's whatever you need, medications, anything that you need for your day-to-day life. And it doesn't mean hoard enough so that if you're having to stay in your basement for 6 months, you'll get by. I think that we probably will continue to have fresh tap water. We have good water in West Hartford, so I'm not really going out buying water, but I did make sure that I had enough toilet paper in the house because we were running low. And you know, a lot of people are having their kids home now. You're going to have your kids who are in West Hartford public schools, or any of our private schools also have closed along with the public schools. You need to have enough food for them. You need batteries for their, Xbox controller. You probably, we're not going to have a power outage like we had an extended period of time a couple of years ago. But you need to have your medications too, and you need pet food. Anything, if you end up not able to leave the house, you just need to be able to cope or have somebody drop off stuff at your door. One of the other things that the town is going to be doing is putting together a list of volunteers. So volunteers are going to be needed for providing childcare, for bringing food to the elderly who are homebound, or people who are sick enough to have to stay in isolation, but not sick enough to be admitted to the hospital. So either through the town and or through WeHA, we're going to be collecting volunteers. And we have all these college students who have been sent home for extended spring breaks. So I'm sure, based on the type of people we have living in this town, we're going to be overwhelmed with the generosity and volunteer nature of our community. There's a shortage of blood, and maybe Carol might want to talk a little bit more about this, but people are not leaving the house to do their normal activities. They're not going to donate blood. There's also more sick people. The hospital is going to continue to take care of people who have other issues as well. They have to. So there's a pretty dire need of blood. So if you can donate blood, please do. There are more test kits coming. I don't know if it's at
We don't know
20,
the numbers yet. Let's not talk
yeah,
numbers.
I'm not
There's
sure what those
conflicting
numbers mean,
information out there. Yep.
but there are more test kits coming. The ability to and capacity to test is going to continue to grow, but it has remained a problem, and there's conflicting information about whether or not people who feel like they need to be tested are actually getting access to those tests. So Mayor Cantor says we've moved from containment to mitigation in the last week, and West Hartford is acting accordingly, and I think that's what you're seeing. While there is no one who has tested positive in town, it's probably very, very likely that there are people in this town who have COVID-19. There are people reportedly in isolation at the University of Hartford, which is on the West Hartford line, who have been in contact with people who've been tested positive. So they could have been out in our community very easily. You know, we don't know. You don't know. So stay safe, wash your hands a lot. And I am not a germaphobe, but the minute I leave here, I'm spraying my hands with hand sanitizer, which may or may not do anything, and I'm washing my hands the minute I get back inside my house.
All right, thanks, Ronnie. One comment is, we don't want to alarm anybody, and
We want to inform, not scare,
inform,
right?
not alarm. And 2:00 this afternoon, I got a phone call from my daughter whose work. One of the patients was sent home because there was a fear of inspection. Very alarming to get that call. After an hour or so, we found out, okay, not so serious, but it's not a death sentence by any means.
I think it's a case of, no, it's not a case of being alarming or panicking, but it's a case of taking it seriously and avoiding what could be major problems for a lot of people. I mean, not for everyone by any stretch. We know that 80% of people are going to be relatively fine, mild disease, and the majority of children have mild disease to no symptoms. But it's the percentage of people as they get older where the risk of severe disease and death goes up, and just the impact it has on the healthcare facilities. And as you've just said, there's other conditions that still need to be treated. People are still going to go to the ER with broken bones and heart attacks and strokes and cuts and scrapes and dog bites. All of those people still need to be seen. But it's hard to deal with those conditions if there's 100 people with COVID-19 ahead of them. So it's a case of, again, flattening the curve, pushing it down the line, and doing what we can to allow everyone to cope with everything else that we have to do in society. We've still got to get on and live our lives.
So we've had it open, and the feed is working?
The feed is working,
Okay.
the volume is low, but
Okay,
it's
so-
going to be rebroadcast
Yep.
so they can see the answers.
Okay, so my apologies on the volume, but the good news is Patty has been I've been glancing over her phone, and it hasn't stopped. So we've got a few people looking, and Patty, do you want to give us a couple questions here?
Yes, one of the easy questions, risk to pets, and are they immune?
So I saw a fantastic headline today, which I had to fact check, and it was true. And that was there was initially a concern that similar to other surfaces, pets like dogs could carry it and maybe spread it, and they should be put in quarantine. And apparently the World Health Organization has said that no, this is not true, and the dogs can come out of quarantine. So the WHO let the dogs out.
I saw that too. I've been singing that all day.
It was true. So no, there doesn't seem to be a case that pets are nothing to worry about.
All right, Patty, what's our next question?
All right. Let's hope I don't screw this up. The Connecticut State epidemiologist stated yesterday that if you are feeling like flu-like symptoms with a fever, coughing, etc., you need to think you have COVID-19. How can parents differentiate between the flu, allergies, cold, and COVID-19?
Yeah.
What should they be doing?
That's a really hard question. And you mentioned allergies and threw that in there just for good measure. Because unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the children do so well. And half of them don't have fever. And this is consistent across countries and across experiences. So yeah, you could have a runny nose and a cough and look like you have allergies, honestly. And normally I say, well, allergies don't give you a fever, so that's easy. If you have a fever, you've got a virus, and if you don't have a fever, you have allergies. That's not the case for COVID-19. So it really throws a wrench in the works. Flu tends to be a lot sicker initially in kids. Worse cough, higher fevers, 104. body aches, really, really ill appearing. Flu can be really nasty. But allergies is hard. I mean, if you're going to be managing COVID-19 symptomatically anyway with cough suppressants and decongestants and antipyretics for the fevers, the Tylenol, Motrin, things like that. So in many ways, you're going to be managing it symptomatically. The question about flu is a really good one, though, because kids are still going to get the flu. Even with the vaccine, it's only maybe 50% effective this year at best. So you're going to reduce the rate, but it's not going to be zero. And if your kid hasn't got a vaccine, then they're going to have a baseline risk for influenza. Influenza is treatable. So there's an argument to be made that if you think that your kid might have the flu, to talk to your doctor again. Don't just show up at the ER, but talk to your doctor. Consider flu testing. And if there's a positive test for influenza, that can be very reassuring that your child doesn't have COVID-19. The rates of dual infection are very, very low. So in a way, a positive influenza test is reassuring, and it's treatable. You can be put on drugs like Tamiflu, and they can be helpful. But yeah, differentiating them based on symptoms with what we know is very difficult. Unless you have severe disease in the hospital, then we have a much better idea once you get really low respiratory tract symptoms, which kids don't seem to be getting very much.
I'm going to actually ask a follow-up to that. If your child is exhibiting symptoms and you're not sure what it is, or even if you are, should you self-quarantine just to be sure?
Oh yeah, and that's the one thing you can do that's definitely helpful is quarantining. And currently they're recommending 14 days based on some of the data about exposure time and shedding times, measuring virus in nasal secretions and how long you can sit there for. So that's the rationale for this 2-week quarantine that people are recommending for this condition specifically. And that's why so many of the closings are about 2 weeks in duration. It's similar. It's like if we can put a stop on this now and maybe slow down transmission, we might be able to break transmission chains completely, or at least push it down the line.
All right, Patty, what you got?
All right. Any concerns about exercising in a gym, wiping down the machines first, of course, and spending time in the hot tubs, sauna, steam room after swimming?
I think if you're in a gym that's not very crowded and you're wiping surfaces down and no one else is sick around you, it's probably okay. Again, I'm going to couch everything in terms of probability. Steam rooms and saunas where you're going to be, the air itself is moist, and that can't be good for helping transmission of respiratory droplets. I would be inclined to avoid them, honestly. I don't like them anyway, so I'm biased. But yeah, I wouldn't think that'd be a good idea.
Do what Ronnie does, jog.
I went to the gym this week, though. I'm kind of wondering if
Well,
that was such
all
a good
the
idea.
college kids will be home and they'll be hitting the gym, and I think it's a valid, kind of concern of whether or not they can still go. Have there been any cases of dual infection with flu and COVID-19?
A very small number, like less than 1% of cases were co-infections. They have found flu, they found mycoplasma, and they found RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus, very common virus in pediatrics and in the elderly. It kind of brackets both age groups. But it's very unusual. So it has happened, but at the moment, amongst tens of thousands of cases that people have looked at, there's only a few that they've found. Now, bear in mind, some of this depends on testing. You have to be looking for it to see it. But at the moment, it seems to be fairly low when they have been looking.
All right, this one just came in. If someone is on an immunosuppressant like Humira, Stelara, prednisone, etc., for non-life-threatening, illness, should they talk to their doctor about temporarily suspending the medication?
That is definitely a talk to your doctor moment, but it's a really good question. So the CDC actually talked about this in the last 2 calls that I was on about immune suppressants. One of the concerns and fears about the data from China is that they tend to use very high dose steroids 30 mg per kilo, and we're using like 1 per kilo often when we're treating patients in the hospital. Very high dose steroids. And we know that for some of the influenza strains, that made things a lot worse. They're worried that some of the mortality data that came out of China is made to look a little worse because they used steroids so much. And the CDC has advised us not to do that. So in terms of these other immune suppressants, it's a really good question. Does it increase their risk of catching a virus and having a severe disease? Absolutely. Does it warrant them stopping their treatment? That's a really tough call, because for some people who have severe autoimmune diseases, stopping the immune suppression could make them worse. So what I do think is helpful, though, is to know is if you're on any of these medications, you have an immune suppressing condition like cancer, you're receiving chemotherapy, or you're receiving immune suppressants for an autoimmune disease, is to, if you do find yourself getting symptoms, you absolutely must talk to your doctor. And if you are seen at a hospital, you must obviously let them know about your prior health conditions and the treatments you're on, because someone with relatively mild disease and nothing else wrong with them is going to be sent home. Someone with relatively mild disease with high dose immune suppressants may be someone who's honestly watched a little more closely. Maybe someone who's going to get tested versus not tested, and maybe someone who's going to get admitted versus not admitted. But it's very much going to be down to the individual patient, and very much a case of talking to your doctor about your individual risk for whether you should be reducing doses, and whether you should be seen sooner rather than later if you get symptoms.
All right, and a follow-up to that one. Are individuals with autoimmune conditions not on meds at a higher risk?
So autoimmune disease not on meds, probably not, but we're not sure. We do know that the 3 highest risk factors for severe disease other than age were heart disease, and partly it's because the virus does actually seem to attack the heart in some way. So as well as the lung disease, there's some cardiac effects on it. So if you have existing heart disease, that's a problem. If you have diabetes, which we know does affect the immune system and make it somewhat suppressed and more prone to infections and illness, and if you have cancer. Now, I didn't see, no one yet has reported anything on autoimmune disease per se, things like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis. And interestingly, no one's reported much on asthma either. And that was a question that came up a number of times on some of the calls I've been on. What about patients with asthma? Are they definitely higher risk? Have we seen worse outcomes with them? And that's a question that I think a lot of us want answers to. So in terms of autoimmune disease without immune suppressants, it doesn't seem yet that that's a high risk factor.
Okay. Any more questions, Penny?
One more here.
Last question of the night.
I heard zinc lozenges were recommended. When should we start taking them? Now while you feel fine, or wait until you don't?
I think I refer the asker to my answer on vitamin C. Now, the difference between what you might see with zinc and some of the other things is there may be some data in vitro that using ions like zinc, like the metal ions in culture solutions, can inhibit the growth of various viruses and bacteria and whatever else. That's very different from whether zinc is actually helpful if you ingest it, if you take it as a supplement, as a multivitamin. So I don't think there's a ton of good data that it helps otherwise. I mean, you can take it whenever you want to take it, or not, I guess, but I don't have a good answer. I wish we had a more definitive, reliable treatment option for people, whether it's a supplement, whether it's a nutraceutical, whether it's a drug. But right now, everything is experimental, or we know it doesn't work.
What's the timeline? I mean, I know there's been a lot of news reports, but what's the timeline on a vaccination or even something to help alleviate the symptoms?
Yeah. So at the moment, there are a number of clinical trials for one particular drug, which has been released for a small number of patients on a compassionate use basis, which means it might work, we'll try it, it works in the lab. But as the clinical trials kick off, that compassionate use is going to be taken away. And the reason is you need to really know that it works. You can't just start throwing drugs at people without really any evidence. So the manufacturer, Gilead, is sponsoring 2 studies for moderate and severe disease. And then the NIH actually has another protocol using that same drug, but with the option of using other agents as they come online. None of these studies involve children or pregnant women. So that was the topic of today's discussion with the CDC. And so for those age groups, there's like nothing they can offer them. Potentially, as I said, the compassionate use of a medication, but that's probably likely to go away as the clinical trials kick off. If those agents show promise, there's a chance that they'll be approved or they'll be brought on in an accelerated fashion for treatment. But I've heard very, very little data and feedback from clinicians yet about how effective they are. Well, that one drug might be. Some of the other drugs that they've looked at in the lab, there's a handful of them that seem to work again in the lab, but haven't been tried very much in people at all.
Okay.
So.
Great. Do you have any more thoughts, Ryan?
I actually have 2 hopefully quick questions.
Yeah.
One, and I'm not sure who the right person is, if anybody can answer this. For our mental health, while we're going through this is kind of unprecedented territory for all of us. What suggestions does anyone have on what we can do to distract ourselves? And being a news person, I'm kind of in the thick of it, so I can't really read about anything else. But for the general public, you've got kids home with you. Are there any suggestions for what you can do? And then my other question is there any end in sight? Do we have any estimate of how long we might be dealing with this virus before? And actually, what would result in it being, the pandemic being over?
Probably should deal with the questions in reverse order.
Sounds good.
To answer the last one, it'll be over when it's over. And as it's a coronavirus and a new one at that, it's likely, and this is my opinion, this is not fact-based, it's just kind of experience-based and an opinion, but I think what's likely to happen is a large swathe of the population will get infected, will have some immunity develop, the cases will slow down, and it'll end up becoming the 5th pathogenic human coronavirus on one of our panels that we test for whenever anyone comes into the hospital. How long that'll take, going back up the question tree, it could be anywhere from a month or 2 or a year or 2, I don't know. We could be looking at a long haul here. Depends how many people need to get infected for it to start to slow down. And how quickly we can shut it down. As the mayor said, the cat's out of the bag now. We've moved beyond containment to mitigation. Travel bans and closing borders and things like that, the cat's out of the bag. And the experience from Seattle when they had their first cases, they're very busy there as well, very busy in the hospitals. And their best guess is this has been circulating since January, and no one knew.
Yeah.
And then you get enough of cases build up so that the occasional severe respiratory infection can sneak under the radar, but when you have 20 at once coming in, you're like, whoa, now we really have something. And so that's probably what we've been dealing with. It's been circulating slowly in the community for a while. In terms of what we can do, I can talk a bit about the pediatric side of things, because the AAP actually did put out a link. I think it's, I can't remember the name of the website, but they're actually, if you Google AAP coronavirus advice or something for kids, the American Academy of Pediatrics, there actually is a whole website on what to do with them, how to deal with school closings, how to talk to them about things like stress and exposures, in terms of being honest, in terms of limiting media access, finding other things to do, read a book, make a jigsaw, family activities. You're going to be closer to your dog than ever before. There's a lot of cats are going to get airtime on YouTube. So things like that. For the bigger picture, perhaps we should talk to some of the grown-up people.
You want to do this? I'll let you do that.
Well, I guess the suggestion that we would just tell folks is get informed, and that's going to help you relax, and then stop watching the news and do something else. Read a book.
But you can
Color.
read weha.com.
Oh, you can. That's right. Yes, you got to read the factual ones. And that is this. Instead of looking at it as a terrible burden, look at it as an opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity to get to know your kids a little bit better, your spouse, your family. Check up on your family. Make sure that if you have an elderly parent, they have enough food. They don't just have the 2-minute phone call. Oh, I'm fine. Talk to them for a little bit more. Make sure that they have enough food or toilet paper or medicine. But it's really just a time to kind of get informed, get prepared, and take a deep breath and relax.
I just want to add one thing when we're talking about our seniors too. A governor put out, I believe yesterday too, in the long-term care facilities that they were restricted to visitors. So again, only for those folks that have either end-of-life stage or hospice. They're really trying to limit visitors, and are going to try screening the staff first better too, just in case we don't have sick staff caring for our seniors in the long-term care facilities.
Yeah.
So, and again, as Bob said, check on your family members, check on your neighbors.
There was actually something new about the facilities for senior citizens or nursing homes that came out today in the governor's executive order. Do you know what that change was? It looks like, and I might be saying this wrong, but they can choose one person to actually come visit them in Connecticut.
They can, and there were some limitations, and even they said like if there was other people, like say attorneys or any other figure that needed to come in, they would just screen them as they came in, and they would do some limited, but they definitely have changed it, but they definitely have limited visitors for the long-term care facilities.
Okay. Any more questions?
One more, and
Okay.
it may be, one more, and the question came up about the West Hartford businesses. What's going to be, is there anything going to be done to help them down the line? What kind of services and things like that will be available to help these businesses, these small businesses, that this is how they survive? Because now, if things happen with them, it's a chain reaction down the line. What can we do to help support? And it's probably a long-term question that Ronnie will be able to slowly help us with information. But does the town have something in mind for local businesses?
It's a good question. That's more of a policy question at the council level, or actually even above that, up above at the state level. That link that we talked about, or the webpage that the town has, and we also has posted, or links to it, has a site for businesses to go through to FEMA that has suggestions. One is obviously trying to keep your business going, keeping your everybody there healthy, make sure your customers stay healthy too. No one's saying don't go shopping. What they're saying is stay away from crowds. So we encourage people that you should still go to the grocery store, but maybe not go 5 times. Make sure you have that list and get it done once. No one's saying don't go to restaurants. But if it's a crowded business, you should think twice about that, I think. Go ahead, Doc. Yeah.
I saw one thing today, which I thought was a really good idea, and it was a way to support local businesses and smaller businesses in particular. Places like restaurants, go ahead and buy a gift card. Particularly if you can do it online, you don't even have to go up and show up, but support them with giving them the money, and then you got a gift card, and then you got a date night. At a restaurant you can give it as a gift, you can use it for your spouse or whatever. I think that's a really nice idea to support smaller businesses, is at least help them through. If you don't feel comfortable and safe going out into a crowded restaurant, get a gift card and at least support them that way. Do what you can.
So, and also in line with that, I've been hearing from a lot of businesses because I write this Monday Business Buzz column, so they are trying to get the word out about what they're doing to keep their businesses going. A lot of the restaurants are using waiter wheels or DoorDash or Uber Eats so that you can still order food and have it delivered. I know I got a press release today about waiter wheels. We'll drop it on your doorstep. You don't even need to have any face-to-face contact. They'll just let you know when it's there, and then you can open up the door and bring it in. I just heard from one of the pet stores, Pet Supplies Plus, up in Bishop's Corner. They are doing delivery of pet food or pet supplies. You can, I shouldn't say delivery. You can go pick it up outside. You don't even have to go, it's curbside service. So there's a lot of businesses that are doing what they can to accommodate people trying to stay away from other people as much as possible.
All right. Patty, any more questions, or are we wrap it up?
I think we're wrapping it up.
Okay.
I think that basically the questions have been answered. It's just the long term.
Okay.
People are worried.
Is. And my hope, I can't thank the 3 of you enough. I'll give you an official thank you in my remark when I close here, but I do hope we're going to do this again soon, and we're going to try to rotate the guests a little bit. Wouldn't mind having you back just as the medical expert, but there were a few policy questions tonight, so
Yeah.
hopefully we can get a few policy folks in here maybe next week, and we'll keep this going. I do want to thank all of our panelists for appearing tonight. Dr. Nicholas Bennett, Carol Steinke, Bob McHugh, and Patty Albee for her help with watching the feed and getting those questions to us. Thank you, Patty. I also want to thank WeHot.com News for allowing this to be put together and for us to brand it as such. Thank you, Ronnie. A rebroadcast of this event will be available on WHCI and the WHCI YouTube channel. It'll repeat on this channel. Additionally, the Facebook feed will be left up and available at WeHot.com and the Neighbors and Friends Facebook page. Perhaps not since World War II have we faced such a grave threat. It was all hands on deck in the first half of the decade of the 1940s, and today it's all hands on deck as well. But we are more than prepared
Washed hands.
for this fight. Yes.
Wash hands on deck.
I will close with a short quote from World War II spoken by General George Patton: "Do more than is required of you." And I thought that was really appropriate. I'm John Lyons for Ronnie Newton and all of our panelists. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe.